Hey everybody, welcome to the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. I'm very excited for today's conversation with May Pang. We're going to get to her in just a moment, but first, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. May Pang. She is the subject of the just-released documentary, The Lost Weekend, A Love Story, in which she recounts her legendary 18-month romantic relationship in 1973 and 74 with John Lennon, which began at 22 when she was John and Yoko's personal assistant. It was an affair orchestrated by Yoko herself. She's also a photographer, author, and jewelry designer. Her intimate portraits of John during their time together include rare images of the former Beatle and music legend and his son Julian. In addition to working for Apple Records and John and Yoko, she worked in music publishing at United Artists, Famous Music, and Island Records. May, welcome into the back room.
Well, thank you for having me.
I just want to say I watched your documentary this week, The Lost Weekend, A Love Story, and I was blown away. It's terrific. It is absolutely terrific. And the biggest takeaway for me is that you are a very nice person.
Oh, thank you.
And I say that because it's easy when you watch a documentary that might be narrated by the subject or is directed by the subject. Obviously, there's the slant that one might get. But there's a couple of reasons why I say what I say that come through so clearly in a film. One is that as this young woman, amid this chaotic thing you were in for 18 months, you became close with John's first wife, Cynthia, and maintained a relationship over the years. That kind of stuff doesn't happen very often, especially when the circumstances are as like the ones you were involved in. And then even more importantly, the fact that you were the one, the catalyst, to help bring John and his son with Cynthia, Julian, back together. And Julian's in the film. We see the way he is with you and you are with him and how you talk to each other and the obvious love for each other. And so that really jumped out at me, that someone who was as young as you were at the time, who I consider to be the adult in the room during that time.
Huh.
You know,
I've heard that from several people and yet I was the youngest in the group. Yes, I'm the oldest in the group.
Yeah, well, it's important to point out that John was, I think, 10 years older than you. And
Yes.
Yoko was 7 years older than John.
Yeah, me and her are 17 and a half years.
Right. So when you were being told to have an affair with John, that was coming from a woman who was 39 or 40 years old, and you were 22, and it involved a man who was 32. So you really were young, and the way you handled that situation, it's very impressive. So my first question to you is, it's been 50 years. Why now? Why does May Pang's story come out now?
Well, you know, first off, this movie started more than 6 years ago. So this is not just something that happened like within the last year.
Right.
The other thing was, I think, I let it go for many, many years. I've written about it. People didn't really believe me, as it were. They couldn't believe that such a thing could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I left it. But when people start coming back at you and say, I know everything about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that isn't the way it happened. They said, oh, no, I read everything. And it's true. So it's that now we're in those times where the more lies you hear, they seem to be the truth. And I'm like, that's not the way it goes. So I thought, you know what? It's time that I have to straighten out the truth, really. And we're at an age where it's more, I think it was more acceptable, where it is also more visual. Mm-hmm. People don't always read. They didn't find, some people now saying, I've been looking for your book forever, and they can't seem to find it.
Right.
But it is so easy now to do the visual and let it go out and let people see it the way, it happened, as opposed to reading it. And now they're trying to find the book and they can't find the book.
Yeah. I actually looked for it myself, and I think you can find a copy, but it's like $300.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of money
It must
because
be out of
they're all out of print.
right, right.
They're all out.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to anyone who's a Beatles fan, and I'm a huge Beatles fan. In fact, my late wife and I, when we were married, our wedding song was "Oh My Love,"
Ah,
John and Yoko song. And when I made my documentary about Adrian, I was able to use that song in the film thanks to Yoko. And so when you grow up a huge Beatles fan, you hear about the Lost Weekend all the time. It's just something that's legendary. And you know that it's not a weekend, that it was a much longer period. But I think what a good documentary does, and this is what I tried to do with my film, is that it takes a subject and or a person that you've known and on some level your whole life, but it just completely opens the door into that person's world, into that person's life, into that person's thinking. And so May Pang as a person is someone I've been familiar with my whole life, but I had no idea who you were. I had no idea, to your point, I had no idea what this story really was. And it is a fascinating look into this young 22-year-old woman who is thrust into this madness of two huge, powerful, controlling, domineering, and how you got through that and were able to move on with your life. It's a fascinating window into that period. And so I thank you on behalf of a lot of Beatles fans of finally having that story be put out into the public, because it is such an important, to just say Lost Weekend without really understanding what it means from your
I know.
perspective, John's perspective, Yoko's perspective.
It was, John said, I'm going to be using that phrase, and I know they're thinking it's going to be about us. And it wasn't about us, but it was about the time because of people kept bringing up his antics, when they were out with Harry Nilsson, he was drunk. And, and I say to people, I said, who's going to make the better copy when they go out? Harry Nilsson, John Lennon? I guess John Lennon's going to win out on that front page.
Every time.
So, and each time. But if you read the stories about the times that he was drunk, it's only a couple of times. But the press have made it over and over. Look at it, the Troubadour, he's been thrown out, and they keep mixing certain other things in there. So it looks like, so for the 18 months, he's been absolutely, just out of his mind. But if he was out of his mind, and he couldn't make the records. He couldn't have done the stuff that he was doing creatively if he was drunk. That wasn't his style. We never, the times that we've spent in LA, it's always been crazy. People thought we lived in LA. We never lived in LA. We couch surf or house surf. We stayed in people's homes or things like that. And then we only lived in 4 places. Our lawyers, Lou Adler, who graciously loaned us his place in Bel Air. We stayed in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, and the famous house that we rented for Harry Nilsson's album, Pussycat. And that's where it was once built by Louis B. Mayer, but owned at one time by Peter Lawford. And we showed up there.
Yeah, we know what craziness took place in that house.
Oh, you can imagine much more than the ones I've had. I mean, and we had that in Santa Monica. And you think about who was in the house. And again, the house mother, me, again, was minding the house. And we had Klaus Warman. We had what was it? We had Keith Moon. We had Ringo. We had Harry. We had also Ringo's business manager was also staying there. And then during the day, we had all the other musicians.
Alice Cooper.
Oh, no, Al didn't come. But we were talking about, I'll tell you who else was there. We had Jim Keltner, Jesse Davis, and we had anybody who decided they wanted to pop in. But I don't remember Al being there, though he was at one of the jam sessions that we did.
But wasn't he part of that, the Hollywood Vampires? Wasn't he the...
Yeah. The Hollywood Vampire thing happened because there was a group that kept getting together We didn't have a name yet. It wasn't called the Hollywood Vampires yet.
Mm-hmm.
But we kept meeting up with Alice and everybody else that was in the group. Everybody would just get together, Mickey Dolenz.
Mm.
And then next thing you know, but John was more of a, oh, okay, whatever happened, he'd come in and leave. But Harry Nilsson was was the ringleader. I would
Right.
always say he was the ringleader,
Mhm.
no matter what. And, I had to explain about people don't even realize I was at the Troubadour when all of this happened as well. So,
And you were
yeah.
straight during this period. You didn't do drugs. You weren't drinking. And what was it like being the
Well, you see
straight
the
one in the bunch?
Coca-Cola. Yeah, I know. I was called Miss Goody Two Shoes by a lot of females that were out there. They thought that I was too straight. I mean, I would have, I think if you counted maybe 20 drinks in the whole time, that was all I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about lightweight, like maybe a mimosa
Mm-hmm.
or, I wasn't a great, but if you see bottles of Coca-Cola, now that's the drink. That's what I had in my hand.
So you mentioned the word mother before, and I want to ask you about this because this is something that I kind of took away from the film as well, in that so much has been said over the years about John and Yoko's relationship. He called her mother. One can surmise that on some level, their relationship, maybe not so much at the very beginning, but eventually took on more of a business one where she controlled a lot of the business affairs. And that when he went with you, we saw a side of him that was more just relaxed, loose, having fun, just being a young guy. And you're reminded in the movie that when this was going down, he was, what, 30? That's a young man who should be having fun and enjoying his life and appreciating the spoils of
He
his
didn't
work.
have that. Remember that. He didn't have it because as the Beatles, they were locked up in rooms and
Right.
they were escorted to every place. And just going back, Yoko didn't do the business till after John went back to the Dakota.
Mhm.
She didn't handle the business beforehand. It was always handled
After they broke. Right.
by other people.
Mhm.
And John always had somebody to handle, and as I'm sure with all the other guys as well, the other three members, they always had business people handling it. I think with John and myself, we, I took care of most of it because, he signed it. He signed the credit cards. He did have a credit card. I'm just, I understood because how many actors and actresses, entertainers, they're not aware of it either. So I didn't fault him, but he started to learn a lot of it because it was just me and him.
Mhm.
Go out in the taking care of different things. I did all the work for the production for the the recordings.
Mhm.
So I would tell him what was going on. He was aware. He didn't need to know the nitty gritty. He didn't, that was fine. It didn't bother me. But he knew his lawyer wanted him always to know what was out there.
Mhm.
So Harold always made sure, sat him down and said, here it is. Let me tell you what it, and he would just lay out the facts for him.
Mhm.
He may not have liked it, but
Mhm.
and when certain numbers came up or anything, he would say, hey, that's the way it is. If you don't like it, then we got to make a change.
But there seemed to be a lot of joy in the relationship between you two that may or may not have been evident when he was with Yoko. Like he was experiencing something that he needed to experience. That's what I took
Yeah,
away from the film, that period was just him going on a journey that he may not have been able to have before that, which makes it
it's
in a
true.
way kind of really necessary. But the way it came about is just so bizarre.
I know. It's, John and I really had a good time because it's only two of us. We didn't have an entourage. I didn't
Mhm.
have an assistant. It wasn't necessary. And he liked the fact that it was just the two of us. So when we got in the car, I did the driving.
Mhm.
When we would, when we go out to dinner, I may make the reservation, but whatever it is, we got there, it's just two of us. There wasn't a whole bunch of people that followed us.
Mhm.
Um, and in New York City, people didn't realize we actually lived in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day he said, "What should we do today?" And this was a Saturday. And I said, "Well, you always said you wanted to see what New York was about, the city." So I took him on a bus ride. And I'm talking about a city bus. Got on he goes, "A city bus?" I said, "Yes, let's get on the city bus."
Did people
And he
notice him and you?
well, there wasn't that many at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then as people started to file on, they sort of looked at him and they go, "Is that," yeah, you could hear this, the younger, "Is that John Lennon? I'm sure that's John Lennon." And John could hear it. He turns to me and he goes, "The nose. It's the nose. That's how it comes about." And then finally someone just yelled out, "Hey, John, how you doing?" He goes, "Fine." And he yelled out, "See, I told you it was him." And John looked at me calmly and he said, "Time to get off."
Mm. But
So that's
in
what
in large part, he really enjoyed that part of New York City living. That's why he moved there, right? He
Yes.
wanted to be able to walk the streets and just be a regular Joe and mix it up. And the thing that I loved about the film is that the archival that is in that movie, the photographs, your photographs are incredible. The film
Thank you.
clips, the rare clips that we're finally seeing that have never
I've
been
never
out there.
seen some of them. Believe me, they found the directors found
Mhm.
some clips I had never even known that was out there. So it
Mhm.
was quite a surprise to me too.
And there's so many things in the film that are sort of unanswered in a way. Like when he goes back to Yoko and he says to you, "She's allowed me to come home." And I think you said, "Allow?" Like just that framing, I think, speaks volumes about so many things that raise a million questions. What did that mean to you at the time?
Um, yeah, I know. There's a lot more to it. It's a very complicated answer, and I think without giving it away, because I say other things in there. Um, the relationship, and I guess I could say it never ended.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it comes down to. So there's a lot of little things, and I guess we all know how everything ended for everyone. But John and I, there was still unfinished stuff that's still out there.
Give us a couple of glimpses into when you were with him for that period of time, which was very intimate. Give us a couple of examples of like the amazing things of John Lennon and the not so amazing things of John Lennon.
Well, the amazing things about John was that he was such a cat person. He loved
Interesting.
cats. Oh, we brought home, we were recording and I said to him, "Oh, somebody brought in a box of kittens, that they're giving away." And he looked at me and I had no idea, mind you, that he even had any inkling of any towards animals. So and he looked at me, he says, "We can't have any. We travel too much." I said, "That's fine." I said, "I just wanted you to know, that's all. Somebody brought in kittens." So I guess I guess we were in the mixing stage or something. I went downstairs and I picked up a kitten and I brought this tiny little thing back up and I walked in and he turned and he looked at me and he goes, "All right, you've done it now. It's your fault. You did it." And I'm like, "What did I do?" And he goes, "Now we have to have a kitten." And I went, "What?" I had no idea. So he goes, "Come on, let's go downstairs. Let's pick one out." I said, "Okay." So he went in and goes, "All right." There were 8 or 9. I forgot how many. And he picked out one and it was a black kitten, a little white. And I said, "Okay." So I'm carrying it upstairs. He couldn't help it, right? So then I went back downstairs a couple of hours later. I said, "Yeah, all the kittens are gone except for one white one, because they all came from the same litter."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "One white one. Nobody wants it because it's too loud." And he said, "Get it." Now all of a sudden we went from none to 2. And I didn't realize what it was. He grew up with kittens and cats and he loved it. And when he brought them home, all he wanted to do was play with them. So that's the other side of John that I had never seen before. He just loved the cats all over him. He just loved them hanging all over him. So that's the other side. Then the side, and I got a rare glimpse, obviously, of the interaction between John and Paul,
Mm-hmm.
or John with George, or with Ringo. So it was, each was so different. And it was just, it was amazing to see.
So when you were out
And there was no animosity. There was none whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you were out in the Pacific Coast Highway House, there's a moment where Paul comes over. Apparently, he was sent by Yoko to kind of
Yes.
repair things, but they had an incredibly deep bond, right? And the movie implies that there was going to be maybe some kind of reconciliation. That they would maybe write together. They were on that path, weren't they?
That was when we got back to New York. And John and I had this apartment on the East Side, where we have a balcony, so by the river, and this is where we saw the UFO and everything.
Right.
But anyway, so when Paul would come over, this is after they had, signed the contract to break up the Beatles and all that stuff. John turned to me, and after, Paul had come by. Paul and Linda were always big visitors coming to our home when they were in New York. Mm-hmm. So kept at, he said, they were talking about the new album. And he said that they were going to do down in New Orleans, which of course piqued John, because he wanted to go to New Orleans. And I go, New Orleans, interesting. So didn't think anything of it. They were leaving. So a couple of days later, as John is playing the guitar, he goes, May, I got to talk to you. And I'm saying, yeah, okay. I'm doing some work. He goes, what do you think if I wrote with Paul again? And I always said, it was like my head turned, like at The Exorcist, you swung the head around. What do you mean? Mm-hmm. And he said, what do you think? I said, listen, if you two were writing, solo, you're good. But when the two of you got together as writers, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. That really was far superior. Mm-hmm. No one could beat you at it. He goes, okay. Yeah. And he really wanted to go, and he thought about it. And just before things happen, which people will have to see, and, John's saying, let's make those reservations. Let's go down. I want to go down to New Orleans. I do. And I told this to Paul. I actually told this to Paul years and years later, that John and I were planning on coming down to see him. And he had no idea, because, we were doing it at the spur of the moment. But Paul ended up finding out later, also after I told him, he saw a postcard that Derek Taylor had from John that said, thinking of visiting the Max in New Orleans. So
talk about unfinished business, So I want to ask you, the Lost Weekend, in and of itself, the word lost is a pejorative, right? Weekend certainly doesn't appropriately describe the amount of time it was. Over the years, did that legendary coinage, did that just annoy the hell out of you? Did you ever think about, like, first of all, nobody was lost. We had a great time. And second of all, it wasn't a freaking weekend. It was 18 months. Did that ever really bother you?
Well, in the beginning, you just sort of accepted it. I just said, okay, because I was still a little in shock of our relationship. And I let it go. But more and more as time went on, you're right. I got annoyed. They go, I've seen, cool fans writing, oh, why, why is she talking about this? She was only with him for a weekend.
Right.
They have no idea of any of the things I was involved in. And, I've seen it, people just having not a clue. So I let it go until it finally, you get to that point and you say, I can't let it go anymore, because I'm getting tired of somebody else taking credit for something that I knew that I was the one who was part of, not somebody else. Mm-hmm. So that's when I said, okay, now it's time for me to do it again.
Yeah, and that's really the point of the film, which it does achieve so clearly. And so in our final couple of minutes, I want to ask you, I remember where I was when I heard that John was murdered, and I can close my eyes and feel the visceral emotions that I felt at the time. It was just incredibly surreal, the thought that, like, these guys weren't going to live forever, right? I mean, how surreal was it?
It was surreal because I heard it over the radio and I'm thinking, this can't be happening. I happened to be on the West Side, not far from the Dakota when this was happening. And I'm like, oh my God, this can't be happening. You're right. Nobody, we're thinking we're not all gonna be here on this earth forever, but the thing is, you're not thinking at the age of 40 either, so it really to have left this earth the way he did, so violently and not on a more peaceful way of going, not of old age. I have a drawing that John did for me where what he thought he looked like in his 60s,
right.
Like when I'm 64, with a little pot belly and, he's no clothes on, sitting there with his cigarettes and a cat on the raft. And, so these are like, that's how he pictured himself. So to think of him not, to go away in such a violent is still mind-boggling to me.
And the loss to the music business and the loss to America and the world is it's so profound. When we first started talking before this was set up, I told you about my late wife who was murdered at the age of 40.
Right.
And when I was watching...
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. When I was watching the end of the film, in the end credits, you say, John, we made some great music and memories. I just wish we had more time. Like, that hit me in such a way because I've said that. I know those words. I know the feeling behind those words.
Thank you for reading the credits too. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you, what do you carry around with you today? Are you still in love with John? Because love is a very difficult concept. You can love people forever, especially if they're yanked away from you at such a young age. So I'm curious, what do you carry inside your heart these days?
I think, I think for the world who love John Lennon, and there's many of us, he'll always be a part of everyone's heart. I just have a different piece somewhere that's a little closer to, because I'm surrounded by him. I hear messages. I hear when I hear Number 9 Dream, which is, he was the one that wanted my vocals on there to whisper his name. So I'm always going to hear him a little differently. And, and I know I have just a little slightly closer part of him inside of me. It's just there, and there's, there are no words. It's your first love, your first whatever, no matter who else goes. I don't want to ever have anybody after to be compared to him because that's such a different time period. But it's hard. People like to compare themselves to John, and I'm like, okay, next I got to move on here, but on a whole, he'll always have there's that part of me that it'll never go away,
And over the years and today, what has your relationship with Yoko been?
We really don't have one except, I know she's been ill, so I don't wish her any more illness, worse. But I don't have a relationship with her, but I did run into her a few years back, maybe like 20 years out, it's been, maybe now it's been about 15, or something like that. But prior, it was like 20 years I hadn't seen her. And we saw each other in Iceland, of all places, neutral territory. And it just happened that we happened to be in the same hotel. She was there for this John Lennon songwriting contest. I was doing a stopover on my way to Liverpool. And so I was excited to be in Reykjavik and it was a thing, an event that Iceland Air put together. Who would have known that we would all be there together? And we saw each other in the hotel, in the restaurant. And believe me, all the press, everybody that was in the room, you could hear a pin drop when we came face to face with each other. And I started laughing later on to think, I said, of all days to meet up with her, it was actually on John's birthday.
Well, I have so many questions and I don't want to spoil anything, so we'll leave it at that. But I do want to say that it's a truly fantastic film. I laughed, I cried, I liked you so much. I had so much respect for you, and I really got to know you, and I think that's what a really great documentary does. So I think people are going to really enjoy this film, and I appreciate that you've done it. You and the directors and the producers put this together because it's an important film.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on.
We'll see each other again.
Yes, we will. Take care, May.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.